Hi everyone, thank you all for joining us today for our June Health Equity Speaker Series event. Just wanted to say we try to make every Global event as accessible as possible, and to do this, we'll read any visual content aloud, do our best to uplift and read out any thoughts that come through the chat, and we'll give you a warning if we start music so you can turn down your volume if you choose. Also, we have a live transcript available in English, which you can easily access through the toolbar at the bottom. And feel free to participate as you feel comfortable with your video on or off, or using the chat and reactions as you please. If you need any technical support, please direct message India Benson, who's acting as our tech guide today. And you can also find the name in the participation list with the word tech next to it. We'll give about a few more minutes to see if anybody else wants to join us, and we'll get started around 12:05. Thank you, everyone. All right, thanks everyone for joining our latest installment of the Health Equity Speaker Series. These monthly events are where we turn to the experts in the global health equity movement, particularly leaders who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, or from marginalized communities, as their expertise and contributions are most often systemically overlooked. And as an organization, Global aims to uplift and mobilize the community of students and grassroots leaders to improve the health of people around the world. Climate students learn about health equity leadership directly from the experts, our grassroots partners in Asia, Africa, and the Americas, and become a part of the movement for global health equity. We also believe in the power of the community behind this movement, which is why we make these programs available to everyone. Additionally, these programs are possible because of the generous support of the community, which will drop the link in the chat, or drop the link to our donation in the chat if you would like to do so. My name is Jonathan Castaneda. I use the pronouns he, him, and I serve as GLOMED's program coordinator. I'm also alumni of the GLOMED at UT Austin chapter, and I have the pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Yesnely Flores, who is a doctoral student at Emory University Rowland School of Public Health within the Behavioral, Social, and Health Education Sciences Department. Prior to attending graduate school, Flores was a high school educator. Flores' occupational, academic, and personal upbringing influenced her passion to shed light on the intersection of immigration policy and intergenerational trauma among Latinx youth in the Southeast. Flores' work explores this intersection by utilizing community-based and mixed methods approach. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that if you have a question, feel free to put them in the chat, DM India or myself, or wait until the end when we'll have time for audience Q&A. And I will now pass it over to Yesnely.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to quickly share my screen, so hopefully I can do this without messing anything up. Can you all see it? Yes, okay. So real quickly, my name is Yesnely Flores. My pronouns are she, her, and ella if you speak any a little bit of Spanish. And for those who are visually impaired and joining us, I have currently black, purplish hair. I'm wearing a white shirt and some gold hoops, and I have brown eyes. And I quickly wanted just to acknowledge the land I'm currently on, which is Muscogee Creek land. But yeah, so today I'll be really just talking about kind of my research, which focuses a lot on mixed status Latinx youth and intergenerational trauma. So really examining the impact of intergenerational trauma due to immigration policies amongst mixed status Latinx youth. So I wanted to ground ourselves in a couple of words that I'll use throughout my presentation. So the first one being Latinx, it's a gender neutral term for Latino or Latino Americano, meaning a person who originated from Latin America. My rule of thumb is really just like, if you don't know what a person would like to be identified as, just make sure to ask them. Some people like Latine, Latinx, Latino. So just make sure to ask. For this presentation, we're going to be using Latinx. Then the next term is mixed status. A family that contains at least one undocumented family member, and that may be someone who's currently in the process of getting a green card or is completely undocumented, or may contain a visa. Then structural violence, I'm really talking about the political, economic, and social arrangements that put individuals and population in harm's way. And then ethno-racial trauma is an individual or collective psychological distress and fear of danger that results from experiencing or witnessing discrimination, threats of harm, violence, and intimidation directed at an ethno-racial minority group. And then intergenerational trauma, which is really the concept we'll be focusing on, is a cumulative emotional and psychological wounding that is transmitted from one generation to the next. So I don't know why my other pictures aren't loading, but hopefully, let's see. Hopefully it will do that. Can y'all still see my screen? Hopefully. Okay, well, if the other pictures don't show up, it's fine. I'll kind of describe what they were supposed to. Oh, they're there. Okay, so I'd like to start all my research projects really talking about my own positionality and really what grounds my work. So I was raised by Mexican immigrants in a small town called Garwood, Texas, and Jonathan and I actually went to the same high school, and it's a real rural, white, mostly Republican area. So I really had to either assimilate or kind of just find my own space in like the sea of white. And being a first generation kind of child of immigrants. And then from there, it wasn't until I went to San Antonio, Texas, and attended University of Texas there, where I attained my bachelor's degree in community health, where I really was able to find people who look like me and really start to unpack all my internalized depression and things like that, but still really navigating my own mental health throughout this and not really knowing what to call that at that point. And then right after my bachelor's degree, I went into teaching, and I was a high school teacher. I taught chemistry and algebra to ninth graders. And these are two pictures, one with my student at our quinceañera, and then one, my students wanted me, for Halloween, wanted me to dress as Will from Stranger Things, from their Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know, they picked out the outfit. So I say teaching was really a launch pad for all my research, in addition to my own upbringing, because I saw my youth kind of go through the same experiences regarding their own trauma in my classroom. And I decided to further experience this through or unpack this and discover more what the root cause was by attending Emory University. So then that brings me to kind of where I started to really question trauma. But then COVID-19 happened right when I was starting my master's program. We're talking August 2020. So I was put on this COVID-19 pilot project, and I quickly wanted to just discuss it because it really would help me discover my research project regarding intergenerational trauma. So the goal of the COVID-19 project was to examine the negative health outcomes regarding policymaking in the sphere of social isolation by identifying the COVID-19 policies that directly or indirectly impact social exclusion in terms of Latinx immigrants. From this pilot project, we found that, and a lot of studies have now talked about how COVID-19 highlighted the large structural inequalities of an interconnected system, that these immigrants' families faced economic instability, food insecurity, and negative emotional well-being, really looking at those health disparities they faced, even just looking at COVID rates. And there was really a need for an expansion of equitable health insurance, decreasing and stopping immigration deportations and social exclusion regarding basic human needs, especially during a public health crisis. And while these were these core findings, one thing I noticed, I was the one conducting most of these interviews, and mostly in Spanish, with frontline workers. They would discuss how families, specifically immigrant families, would be yes, COVID is bad. It's but it's a cherry on top of all the other trauma we are currently experiencing or have experienced. So I then really started the research question of the intergenerational trauma and really start to unpack that. So for some background, before getting started into the nitty-gritty details, if you didn't know, currently there's 44.8 million immigrants that reside in the United States. And the state of Georgia, where I currently find myself in, it was also very shocking kind of going from Texas to Georgia, because Texas is very Latinx, all over, mostly. But for Georgia, it's Black and white. But the crazy thing is there's a huge Latinx population because of the 1996 Olympics, as well as the agriculture here. But they're kind of a hidden voice. They currently account for 9% of the state's population. And then further, 37% of Latinx family are part of that mixed status household that I discussed, meaning that at least one family member is undocumented. And research has kind of shown us that mixed status families are more susceptible to intergenerational trauma. So when I discussed trauma, I wanted to kind of break it down specifically for mixed status families. So for those who are undocumented, they face migration-related trauma. So it's kind of fallen into these three categories, which total make the migration-related trauma. The first one being pre-migration. So we're really looking at the violence, poverty, political conflict, and limited resources they have from their homeland. And then we look at migration trauma. So we're talking about the actual physical crossing of the border. So many individuals pay for a coyote, which coyote means an individual that helps them cross or guides them through the border. This then leaves them vulnerable to extortion, rape, and murder. And this is not even discussing the actual physical trauma of crossing the border, such as dehydration or heat exhaustion. And then we're looking at post-migration / settlement trauma. So really thinking of the structural violence, such as COVID-19 showed us, these families didn't qualify for the COVID check, right? Or social isolation and the lack of equitable job opportunities, and just straight racism, ethnocentrism, and natism. And then for my project, the way I kind of defined immigration policies was in three large realms or categories. First one being healthcare. I kind of saw healthcare the inability to get health insurance, or the limited or no access to healthcare services. And then when we're thinking of exclusion from structural support, so the inability to get food stamps, things like that, that really help an everyday like citizen kind of like navigate these social inequities. It's just immigrants or undocumented families do not have that safety net. And then for discrimination, we're looking at deportation, detention centers, but specifically in the context of this project, for Georgia, Georgia has some of the most strict immigration policies. For example, they have 287G, which is a partnership between ICE and the police system or police department here, where the police can conduct the same services or kind of like detain individuals just like ICE can. So that's kind of like the way I looked at immigration policies when we did this research project. And the theory that really guided this, I adapted two theories, one specifically from Dr. Chavez Duenas. If you ever heard of her, she does incredible work for Latinx population. But the way you kind of look at this diagram, I looked at the historical and the structural kind of concepts. So historical thinking of like colonization and how that kind of guides the anti-immigrant laws that we currently reside in. So lack of healthcare, limited worker rights. And then from there, we're looking at a community like violence, right? And how that all those anti-immigrant laws really create for a hostile environment. And then everyday like ethnocentrism, racism, and natism is really what guided my theory and my thinking for this project. So for the goals particularly, the first large aim was how does structural racism enacted through immigration policies impact the experience of intergenerational trauma on Latinx youth from mixed status families in Georgia. And then I had a sub-aim. So for those who are really interested in health equity work, it is always great to follow up your large aim with an aim specifically regards to resilience when we're talking about vulnerable populations, so that we can highlight the resilience and the strengths of these communities. So the second question was, what are the conditions and characteristics that foster resilience amongst Latinx mixed status youth exposed to intergenerational trauma? And this is like, I could have not done any of this work without my community partner. And it's really blurry, but they insisted on me using this picture. But they're called Sed Familia. They're a mental health nonprofit serving all Latinos and immigrants here in the state of Georgia. And they helped us also on the COVID-19 project, and they helped me on this project as well. So they, as I talk here, help me through this process, this method that I use for my research, which is community-based participatory research, which just means Sed Familia or my community organization worked through every single step with me of this research project. Especially, and it's so important when you do health equity work, is that you like, there are experts out there, like you're an expert, but you need to like see in the community who are the experts there. So again, there was, the way it kind of started was ongoing collaboration with Sed Familia. Again, it kind of launched through the COVID-19 pilot project, the discussion of the intergenerational project. I recruited a total of 36 mixed status Latinx youth in 4 different locations in Atlanta, so Kennesaw, Smyrna, Norcross, and Suwanee. And since I am working with Latinx mixed status families, everything was in Spanish and English. So we're talking consent forms, assent forms, every single form, and also made sure to, when I went on site, to speak in Spanish, English, or Spanglish if needed. So from there, we had 6 focus groups, which were about 90 minutes. Again, Spanish, English, Spanglish, whatever the youth were comfortable with. And then each participant, so the youth themselves, received $30. Just another thing to highlight when you're doing health equity work, make sure you're paying your participants or trying your best to get grants to get sure that they receive the money they deserve. And then from there, all transcripts were transcribed into Spanish or from Spanish to English necessary, and then coded and analyzed for themes. So we had a focus group guide, and I kind of broke it into 3 domains to kind of see what I really wanted to hear from the youth. The first one was just on the mixed status Latinx experience. So I asked questions like, being a first or second generation child of immigrants, what are some challenges you and your peers face in mixed status families navigating society? The second domain focused on undocumented status and perceptions and experiences. So we discussed, how do you think racism plays out in youth's interactions with organizations that's supposed to help them after experiencing something difficult, such as stress regarding fear of deportation. And the third domain was really interesting because essentially what I did was a political analysis or policy analysis. I had the youth go through these immigration policies, have them rank them, and then have an open discussion of what they wanted to change, modify, or adapt. From there, I also gave a socio-demographic survey. So this is just some general demographics. Average age was 14. But one thing I really wanted to highlight from this particular was the race and ethnicity. So I had a criteria where everyone there was Latinx, right? Because it was a project talking about mixed status Latinx youth. But when I gave the youth their own autonomy to figure out their race and ethnicity, 6 participants identified as white and 26 as others. And it was really interesting watching the youth kind of fill this out. You would hear whispers of like, oh, you're supposed to fill out white, like that's what we're like supposed to do. And 26 others who put other, they put like Mexican, or they put like Latinx, they put Chicana, Chicanx. So I think that area just really requires more research to kind of, because research already shows us like the stronger connection we have with our identity, we will have like a better mental health outcome. So I think this is just really telling overall that these youth are really confused on like a simple like survey. So that was really interesting, like finding. And then I had a section for migration related demographics. So 40% indicated their reason for immigrating was because of danger, the need for better lives and jobs. 65% of the youth originated from the United States. And 73% were fluent in English, 82% were citizens. And again, the criteria for the studies was that being in a mixed status family. So the youth might have not been undocumented, but a parent might have been, or a sister, their immediate family. And this one was real stark. I asked a simple question, wasn't quite simple, but it was just have they experienced a family or a friend getting detained by immigration officials? 62% of my total youth said yes. And when I asked the same question regarding deportation, 57% said that they had experienced a family or a friend being deported by immigration officials. So this one, this is real nitty gritty, some quant work, but I'm gonna try my best to kind of describe it. So what I also did, there's this incredible skill called the PIPES, the Perceived Immigration Policy Impacts by Dr. Ayon. And if you're really interested in this work, I really suggest you looking into that in that professor's work as well. But I created kind of a modified version of that skill specifically for youth that kind of had 2 domains. And one was threat to family, and questions that this subscale of threat to family showed was, do you worry about family separation due to deportation? And the other subscale was child's vulnerability. Do you feel unsafe due to the immigration policies? So I kind of did a bivariate analysis and had a low being an average or mean average of anything below 2, and anything high was above 3. And as you can see, we had 7.59 and 9.47, in the total being 17.8. So these were incredibly high perceived like immigration policy impacts for these youth. So this was really a stark finding as well. So this is where I love doing mixed method research, because the numbers really kind of lay out what's there, but like the qualitative data, so like the focus groups, the interviews, is really what is the heart of research, right? Like getting to hear from the voices of those who are living these experiences. So from that data, from my focus group with the youth, I was able to find 5 main themes that were aligned to the main question. And the first theme that kind of arose was that intense emotions and intergenerational impacts on mixed status Latinx families resulting from immigration policy. So they had a lot of emotions in regards to this. One being fear. For them, fear was just their normal day in and day out. Then hypervigilance. So families would talk about like they would have to take specific routes to go to the grocery store because they felt like they were being watched or they might get detained. So like any single thing that like a regular or any individual would do on a regular basis, immigrants families or mixed status families had to be 10 steps ahead in order to navigate that. And then structural vulnerability created negative physical and emotional well-being for these families. And when I'm talking about structural vulnerability, so like again, not having a safety net. So parents having to work extra hard to like bring food on the table. So these are quotes from my youth, again, around average age of 14. So I'm gonna read one of the following. I remember this one instance where there's this grocery store called Tapa, the supermercado, and there's one in Smyrna. And I had to come to the grocery store because of some little incident, something that someone had reported about the store. A whole team of SWAT of ICE came to the store, and a lot of people got deported that day. And it's just like, wow, going to the grocery store to go get food and stuff can get you deported. And then for this participant, I remember this instance very clearly. They were very emotional, just like in talking about this experience. And kind of moving forward, our second theme that I saw was immigration related political rhetoric leads to the manifestation of everyday racism, ethnocentrism, and nativism across generations. So this study was kind of conducted summer of 2021. So the presidential election was still kind of on the back of mind. Even though Biden did win, youth discussed how they faced discrimination from people who were meant to help them, teachers, peers, policemen, how the presidential election heightened tension for mixed status families, and how youth experience their parents like face racism, which is coined vicarious racism, and how difficult that was to watch and really not know what to do. So just to share again, I will not say, I don't think I'll ever consider myself American because I don't feel welcomed in this country. During the 2020 election, Trump was always saying Mexicans are always this. He was putting all Latinos as Mexicans, which is not true. And not just one, how many people voted for Trump. He won his first. He literally won. That's how many people in this country don't like us Latinos. So for our third theme that kind of surfaced was how navigating identities is a side effect of the Eurocentrism that assimilation requires. So for youth, it was constantly so difficult. It was an internal struggle for them because a lot of them were, like you saw, the demographics are from America, right? But they were having a struggle of being American and then being Latinx. They felt like they couldn't mesh those two together. And these cultural differences between generations, so the youth might find themselves like, wanting to do more quote unquote American things, and their Latinx parents kind of not understanding why that is. It kind of led to this frustration and disconnect from like parent to child. And again, really thinking of like the system in place, how the real theme of Eurocentrism forced this assimilation on its youth, and then leads to this disconnect from parent to youth, and then really impacts someone's mental health. And then when youth did try to assimilate, there were constant stark reminders that they were not American. So again, there's so much influence. We Hispanic Latinos have to adjust to this American culture in order to survive, make a living, and hope for a better future for the future generations. So it's just a tremendous impact that, we have to overcome. And we're put in these positions where we have trauma, from all of these experiences. And again, like, just to emphasize, this is a 14-year-old child talking about the need that they need to assimilate. And then for my fourth theme, was kind of the compounded pressures result from the lack of institutional support. So for youth, there was a constant stress, guilt, and shame for being a full-time translator for their family. So they were translating at hospitals or schools, drive-ins. Every single like interaction they were having to translate. And this role as the bridge from America Institutes, right? Like this bridge of that to like their parents, while they carried it with a lot of pride, it made the youth feel like they could not make a mistake. So they really internalized this need to be perfect, not only because like they were their parents' only safety net, but also because like they are brown. So youth were aware of their family's desperation for citizenship and carried that pressure to succeed constantly. They would discuss how their white counterparts really were talked about college, but they felt like they were talked about college as a way for their family to get out of this structural cycle of violence. And then this went really into how youth felt constrained to regulate their emotions. So they felt like they couldn't talk to their parent about having a bad day because their bad day might have not been anything in comparison to a parent who had worked 16 plus hours. So I feel like they want us to live up to a certain point and opportunities that we have that they couldn't have when they were younger. I feel like they want us to take every single chance that we can just have and live a better life, provide for our families when we do have them. And this was a participant kind of talking about what their parents kind of speak on and preach on. And then my fifth theme was really kind of came from the domain 3 where we had that political analysis or the policy analysis. So these are recommended public health interventions to prevent or decrease the amount of intergenerational trauma that Latinx mixed status families endure. So you talked about the importance of a driver's license. In some states, I do believe that people who are undocumented have like this temporary license, but in like southern states such as Georgia, that is not a thing. And especially when there is not public transportation that is very accessible, it makes it very difficult for families to be mobile, and mobility is so important to be like a productive individual and allows you to have like room to like breathe and have space and connect with your family. So the youth really impact how just having a driver's license would really change the platform for their families. And youth also talked about the abolishment of the prison to detention pipeline. So talking about how they instantly know if their parents were to like run a stoplight or do any kind of like minor law infraction, that would immediately mean they would be deported and detained and put into ICE detention center. So then talking about how that should not be a thing. And then they also wanted universal health care. And this was really talked about because we're talking, like, this was a year into COVID, right? And how crucial it was for their family to have universal health care. And finally, they wanted labor laws that protect and humanize their family. They felt like their parents were constantly not home, not because they didn't want to, but because they've been overworked and underpaid and need to provide. And while they're really proud of their parents being hard workers, it just leaves them no space for connection, as well as impacting their mental health. Here's some quotes. Please take time to read any of them once you like, but the one I really like to talk about, or the experience, is the one where it says universal healthcare. This was a room of 9 youth. And I remember sitting there and the question of like, okay, so what are we gonna do? Like, what do we want to modify, adapt, change? When I was giving them the immigration policies, like I had just asked this question. And I thought it would be like an open dialogue and it would be like a long conversation. And one youth, again, age 14, just said universal health care. And every single individual in that room nodded their head and said yes. And that was the end of the discussion. So I just think that talks volumes about how these anti-immigrant policies really impacts mixed status Latinx youth. So just for some discussion and overview, hypervigilance, so again, constantly being watched, has a negative impact, but is also kind of a survival tactic for these individuals, which is really interesting, kind of having this dual fold. It does make youth lean more into their family values. For Latinx, it's called familismo, because they love their family so much. They are constantly worried, which again is bad, but also allows for that room to like really bond for them because they don't want to miss them. And generational tensions between acculturation and youth's own cultural background. So this is a real issue, and there needs to be like a bridge to this gap, right? By recentering the cultural values of those who are Latinx rather than the bourgeoisie. So if we were to reframe like the need to assimilate to kind of, again, centering the cultural values of those who are Latinx in order to bridge that gap and have youth kind of feel stronger and more in a better place with their own values would allow for this bridge to occur. And then vicarious racism and its health implications for Latinx youth is very important. I was able to find some research that showed statistical significance between vicarious racism and a risk for depression, but these were only a few studies and they were all done on Black individuals. So this really needs to be done for Latinx youth and see the impact there. And then for my recommendations and really what my work focuses on is, I really hate the term reform. So I'm like, we had several years for that to occur. My work focuses on border abolition. And then I think that's kind of threefold. I think community healing needs to happen first. And there's a lot of incredible researchers that are doing work on this space already, really focusing on unpacking the trauma and then kind of recentering the cultural values of those who have been oppressed. And then from there, really focusing on interdisciplinary research. So as a public health individual, I really do my best to work in humanities and across disciplines, because there's so much that other individuals are doing and we need to work as a collective in order to really make a systematic change. And doing that alongside our community partners is so important because, again, those are the experts who are day in, day out that are doing this work. And I really think through those kind of tiers, we can then make policy initiatives for things that are happening now, right? Like advocating for individuals to be able to access food stamps and small, minute policy initiatives that can then create that border abolition that we're hoping for. Just some quick overview. So mixed status Latinx youth are vulnerable to the effect of intergenerational trauma, which is stemmed from immigration policies. There's anxiety, fear, desperation, and ethno-racial identity crisis, inability to regulate negative emotions, racism, and generational pressures are the outcomes of the interlocking systems of oppressions that operate and build immigration policies. There's a need for border abolition political framework to be adapted as a public health intervention. So before I kind of open it up to questions, I always like to end my presentations like this. You can scan it. I know some of this is going to be on YouTube, but if you scan it, I really think that while my research is a long-term goal, I think there's small, minute things that we as individuals can do to really create systematic change. So there's like public health, I'll open up like a Google Doc with public health articles related to structural racism, books, organizations, national-wide campaigns that you can really help and support in the time being. And then this art is just by a Latinx artist here in Atlanta that I really do admire and does incredible community organizing. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so now we'll open it up to the group for any questions y'all may have. Thank you so much, Yesnely, for your presentation. Priya in the chat said this presentation has been so thought-provoking and wants to thank you so much.
Thank you.
India, did you receive any questions? She did not. So I think we're coming to a close, but I want to say another big thank you for Yesnely coming out and sharing her research with us. As Priya mentioned, it was super thought-provoking, and I know I took away a lot and definitely have a lot to think about and how I will move forward. Yeah, so this Health Equity Speaker Series is a monthly event, and you can find all of our GLOMIT upcoming programs on our community programming page, which India will drop in the chat. And again, if you'd like to invest in our ability to continue offering programming like this, we'll also drop our donation link in the chat as well. And until next time, bye everyone.
Bye.